Lieutenant James Mitchell sat in the cockpit of his damaged transport, staring at the warning lights that kept blinking like angry eyes. The crash had been rough, real rough. His ship had gone down on the forbidden side of Vex, their prime, the alien planet that humans weren't supposed to visit without permission. Now he was alone, stranded, with nothing but salvageable tech and his training to keep him alive. He'd been walking for hours, searching for usable components from the wreckage when he first heard it. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was something alive, something desperate. It started as a distant wail, almost like a siren, but underneath it was raw pain. James froze. Every survival instinct in his body told him to ignore it, to stay focused on getting rescued. But something else kicked in, something deeper than training. Something human. The sound grew louder as he moved toward it, echoing off the strange crystal formations that jutted out of the alien landscape. The vegetation here was nothing like Earth. The plants had a purplish tint, and they seemed to glow from within, casting an eerie light across everything. James pushed through them, his boots crunching on the unfamiliar terrain, following the noise like it had a rope tied around his chest. Then he saw the water. It was a massive lagoon, bigger than anything he'd expected. The water itself seemed alive, shimmering with colors that shifted between blue and violet. Bioluminescent organisms floated near the surface, making everything glow softly. It was beautiful in a terrifying sort of way. And in the middle of it all, something was struggling for its life. At first, James couldn't process what he was looking at. The creature was enormous, maybe the size of a lion back on Earth but way bigger. Its body was covered in scales that caught the light like polished armor. But what really got him were the eyes. There were 6 of them, arranged in a way that should have looked wrong but somehow didn't. Right now, all 6 eyes were wide open, filled with pure terror. The creature was thrashing in the water, its massive paws, or were they claws? Slashing at the surface, trying desperately to stay above the waves. But something was pulling it down. James could see the creature fighting against some kind of current or force that the locals probably knew about, but he didn't. The water seemed to have a mind of its own, dragging the animal deeper with each second that passed. Above the chaos, on a floating platform made of some kind of shimmering material James didn't recognize, stood a figure. She was tall and impossibly graceful, her skin rippling with colors like oil on water. Her robes flowed around her, made from fabric that seemed to shift and change. Even from this distance, James could tell she was important. There was something about the way she carried herself. This had to be one of the Vextharians, the alien species that ruled this world. The woman, no princess, that's what she had to be, glanced down at the drowning creature with an expression that chilled James more than anything else he'd seen. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was nothing. Complete and total indifference. She watched the creature die like she was watching the weather. Then she turned to her attendants and said something in her own language, something that sounded like wind chimes mixed with growling. Whatever she said, it made her servants laugh. Then she just left. She gestured to her hovering platform, and it began to move away from the lagoon, carrying her back toward the shimmering cities in the distance. She never looked back. The creature, her pet, was being left to drown, and she didn't care even a little bit. Something snapped inside James's chest. He wasn't thinking anymore. He wasn't calculating survival odds or weighing risks. He was just moving. He ran toward the water's edge, his military training screaming at him to stop, to think, to be smart about this. But his legs didn't listen. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. He kicked off his boots as he ran and tore off his outer gear. The creature's eyes locked onto him for just a second. Those 6 beautiful, terrified eyes, and James saw intelligence there. Real intelligence. This wasn't some mindless animal. This was someone. James hit the water hard and the cold shocked his system. But he pushed through it, fighting against the current that was still pulling the creature down. The water was thick, heavier than earth water, and it seemed to move with purpose, like it had a will of its own. His suit's oxygen system kicked in automatically, flooding his lungs with breathable air adapted from the alien atmosphere. He'd never been so grateful for military technology in his entire life. The creature saw him coming and something changed in those 6 eyes. The panic was still there, but something else joined it. Hope maybe. Or just the recognition that someone was trying to help instead of just watching it die. James dove deeper, his hands reaching out through the strange water, grabbing onto the creature's scales. They were warm, almost hot, and surprisingly not slimy like he'd expected. They felt almost alive in his hands. The creature twisted toward him, its body cooperating instead of fighting, like it understood what he was trying to do. Together they pushed upward against the current. James's muscles screamed. His lungs burned even with the oxygen system running. But he pulled harder and harder, refusing to let this being slip away. And then, finally, they broke through the surface. The creature gasped, actually gasped like a human would, and James felt its massive body go limp against him. He dragged it toward the shore, using every ounce of strength he had left, until they both collapsed on the sand, soaking wet, alive, and absolutely exhausted. As James lay there trying to catch his breath, the creature's head turned toward him. Those 6 eyes stared directly into his, and in that moment, something profound passed between them. A connection. A beginning. James sat on the sand, his entire body shaking. Not from cold, but from the adrenaline that was still flooding through his veins like electricity. The creature next to him was breathing heavily, water dripping from its scales in steady streams. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just existed in that space together, two beings who had just been through something that bonded them whether they liked it or not. "Hey," James whispered, not sure why he was whispering. "You okay, buddy?" The creature's head turned slowly toward him. Those 6 eyes blinked in sequence, like they were processing information one at a time. Then came a sound, a low rumbling that started deep in the creature's chest and vibrated through the ground beneath them. It wasn't a growl exactly. It was something else. Something that James somehow understood meant relief. Over the next few days, James learned that survival wasn't just about finding food and shelter. It was about finding purpose. And right now, his purpose had 4 legs, 6 eyes, and scales that shimmered like a prism. He'd started calling the creature Rex, after his grandfather's old dog back on Earth. It seemed fitting somehow. The name carried memories of loyalty and companionship, things James desperately needed right now. The first time he said it out loud, Rex's scales flickered through a series of colors, blues and greens mostly, before settling on a warm amber shade. James could swear the creature was smiling at him. Finding shelter was easier than James expected. About a mile from the lagoon, he discovered an abandoned structure that looked like it had been a temple or some kind of important building once. The walls were made of the same crystal material as the formations outside, and they seemed to hold the temperature steady. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was better than sleeping in the open with unknown predators roaming around. The real challenge was food. James's military rations were running low, and he had no idea how long he'd be stranded. He needed to figure out what Rex ate and what he could hunt or gather. Through careful observation, James realized that Rex was a carnivore, a big one. The creature needed meat and lots of it. So James learned to hunt. It wasn't something he'd ever done before. Back on Earth, his food came from grocery stores and restaurants like everyone else's. But out here, on an alien world with a creature depending on him, he adapted. He crafted spears from local materials. He studied the movement patterns of the smaller creatures that roamed the area. He failed more times than he succeeded, but slowly he got better. And Rex helped in ways James never expected. One afternoon, James was tracking a small herd of 6-legged creatures when Rex suddenly appeared beside him, moving with surprising stealth for something so massive. The creature didn't attack the prey directly. Instead, Rex herded them toward a narrow canyon where James could trap them more easily. It was like they were working together, coordinating without words. When James finally brought down one of the animals, Rex didn't rush forward to fight him for it. The creature waited, watched James dress the kill, and then ate from what James provided. "You understand cooperation," James said one night as they sat by a small fire he'd managed to create. "That's more than a lot of humans do." Rex's scales shifted to a deep purple color as he listened to James talk. James had started doing this every night, just talking. He'd tell Rex about Earth, about his family, about the war that had sent him to this godforsaken planet in the first place. He talked about his sister Katie who wanted to be a doctor, about his father who'd never approved of his military career, about the friends he'd left behind at the base. Somewhere along the way, James stopped thinking of Rex as a creature and started thinking of him as a friend. A friend who couldn't talk back in words, but who understood everything James said anyway. 3 weeks into their time together, everything changed. James woke up burning with fever. His body ached like he'd been hit by a truck, and his skin felt like it was on fire. He'd picked something up, some kind of infection from the local environment that his immune system couldn't handle. His military training told him he was in serious trouble. Infections off-world could be deadly. He collapsed near the temple entrance, unable to do anything but lie there and shiver despite the heat radiating through his body. He'd failed. He couldn't hunt, couldn't protect himself, couldn't even think straight. Rex was going to starve without him. James kept thinking about that even as his consciousness started to slip away. But Rex didn't leave. The creature stayed by James's side and somehow, James never quite figured out how Rex generated heat. His body, those warm scales, seemed to regulate James's fever. It was like lying against a living furnace, but the temperature was perfect, never too hot, always exactly what James needed. Rex pressed against him through the worst of it, and James felt the creature's presence like an anchor keeping him tethered to life. More than that, Rex brought him things. Leaves that James didn't recognize at first. The creature laid them carefully across James's chest and made these soft chirping sounds, like he was trying to communicate something important. James, delirious and desperate, tried chewing them. They were bitter, but within hours his fever started dropping. By the next day it broke entirely. James woke up clear-headed for the first time in what felt like forever, and the first thing he saw was Rex sitting right next to him, those 6 eyes watching with genuine concern. "You saved my life," James whispered, running his hand across Rex's scales. "Again. You actually saved my life." Rex's scales turned a soft golden color, and the creature made that rumbling sound again, the one that meant everything was going to be okay. In that moment, James understood something fundamental. This wasn't about owner and pet anymore. This was about two beings, completely different in every way, who had decided to keep each other alive. This was friendship. Real, genuine, life-or-death friendship. The distress beacon had been James's lifeline for weeks. He'd built it from salvaged parts of his crashed transport, using every ounce of technical knowledge he possessed. It wasn't much, basically a jury-rigged transmitter that broadcast a simple message: human alive, requesting rescue. He'd activated it 3 days ago, and now, standing at the top of a crystal ridge with Rex beside him, James watched as a shuttle descended through the alien sky. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. The shuttle was military, sleek and purposeful, the kind of ship that meant business. James's heart should have been racing with joy. After weeks of being stranded, he was finally going home. But his hand instinctively reached down and touched Rex's head, and he felt the creature tense beside him. "It's okay," James whispered, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "We're getting out of here. Both of us." The shuttle landed with a hiss of hydraulics and dust. The ramp descended slowly, and out stepped Commander Patricia Walsh. She was tall, sharp-featured, with the kind of presence that made you stand up straight just from looking at her. Behind her were 2 military medics and a security team, all armed, all moving with the efficient precision of trained soldiers. Walsh's eyes swept across the landscape until they found James. For a split second, her expression softened, relief that her soldier had survived. Then her gaze moved to Rex and everything changed. Her hand went to her weapon in one fluid motion. The medics stopped walking. The security team spread out, hands moving toward their guns. "Stand down," James shouted, stepping forward immediately. "Don't you dare point anything at him." Walsh's eyes narrowed. "Sergeant, step away from the alien fauna. Now." "His name is Rex," James said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "And he's not fauna. He's a person." "That's not possible," Walsh replied, her weapon still partially drawn. "That creature is unidentified alien life. We have strict protocols about contamination and—" "He's not contaminated," James interrupted. "He saved my life. Multiple times. He's intelligent, he's compassionate, and he deserves to live. I'm not leaving without him." The standoff that followed was the longest few seconds of James's entire life. Walsh stared at him like he'd lost his mind. The security team looked uncertain, their weapons still raised but not yet aimed. Rex, sensing the danger but not fully understanding it, moved closer to James in a gesture of protection. "You don't understand what you're asking," Walsh said carefully, lowering her weapon slightly. "Bringing an unidentified alien species to Earth violates about 100 different regulations. We could be bringing back a plague. We could be compromising human security. I can't authorize that." "Then I'm not going," James said simply. Walsh blinked. "Excuse me? You heard me. I'm not boarding that shuttle without Rex. I'll stay here if that's what it takes." For the first time, James saw doubt flicker across Walsh's face. She looked at him, really looked at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. He was. Every fiber of his being meant every word. "You'd throw away your career? Your family? Everything for an alien creature?" "He's not a creature," James said quietly. "He's my friend. My family. And yes, I would. In a heartbeat." What happened next set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Walsh's report reached the military command structure, which escalated it to the diplomatic corps, which passed it to the United Earth Council. Suddenly, James's refusal to leave an alien animal behind became a news story. Major news outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with it. Soldier refuses rescue unless alien friend can come too, read one headline. Love transcends species, read another. Images of James and Rex together started circulating. James had shown them his personal logs, videos he'd taken over the weeks. In one, Rex was clearly comforting James while he slept. In another, they were hunting together. In a third, James was laughing while Rex gently pushed him around with his massive head like they were playing tag. The public didn't see an alien threat. They saw a connection that challenged everything people thought they knew about loyalty and compassion. Meanwhile, Princess Kaelsira was furious. She demanded the creature's return, called it theft of royal property, threatened to cut off trade agreements with Earth. But here's what she didn't understand. The princess had discarded Rex like he was garbage. She'd left him to die without a second thought. In the court of public opinion, across 17 different human colonies and settlements, she'd already lost. The United Earth Council held an emergency session. They reviewed James's logs. They studied Rex's behavior. They listened to xenologist Dr. Henry Foster argue passionately that Rex displayed clear markers of sentience, problem-solving abilities, emotional intelligence, capacity for loyalty that most humans couldn't match. This creature, Foster told the council, demonstrates not just intelligence but morality. It chose to stay with an injured human instead of abandoning him for easier survival. That's not animal instinct. That's compassion. That's something sacred. In the end, they made a decision that would change human history. They granted Rex legal personhood. Not as an animal to be kept or studied, but as an individual being with rights and protections. The Vextharian princess's claim to ownership was rendered legally meaningless. James received the notification on his communication device. He read it twice to make sure he was understanding it correctly. Then he looked at Rex, dropped to his knees, and let out a laugh that was equal parts joy and relief. "We did it," he said, pulling the creature close. "We actually did it. You're free, buddy. You're actually free." Rex's scales shifted through every color James had ever seen them display, blues, greens, golds, and reds all blending together in a pattern that could only mean one thing: happiness. The transport ship hummed quietly as it cut through the darkness of space. James stood at the observation window, watching Earth grow larger with each passing hour. Beside him, Rex pressed his massive head against the glass, his 6 eyes reflecting the light of distant stars. The creature's scales were shifting slowly through shades of blue and purple, colors that James had learned meant contemplation, maybe even nervousness. "It's going to be okay," James said, placing his hand on Rex's warm scales. "I promise." The journey had been strange for both of them. The ship's crew didn't know what to make of Rex at first. Here was this massive alien creature walking through military corridors, and nobody had any experience with how to handle it. But Rex, in his own way, had won them over. He was gentle with the staff. He never threatened anyone. He even seemed to enjoy when the younger soldiers would sit near him during meal times, staring in wonder at his shifting scales. Dr. Henry Foster, the xenologist who had testified before the council, had boarded the transport with them. He spent hours studying Rex, but not in a clinical way. Foster genuinely seemed to care about Rex's well-being. He'd helped James understand Rex's needs better. Things like the specific minerals Rex required in his diet, the way his scales indicated his emotional state, how his harmonic purring was actually a form of communication more complex than anyone had initially realized. "He's remarkable," Foster had told James one evening. "In all my years studying alien species, I've never seen anything like him. Not just the physical abilities but the emotional capacity. He genuinely cares about you." "Yeah," James had replied quietly. "I know." Now, as Earth filled the observation window, James felt anxiety creeping in. He'd been gone for months. His family had thought he was dead. And when he came back, he was bringing an alien creature that most of Earth's population had only seen in videos. How would people react? Would they accept Rex or would fear win out? The shuttle touched down at New Toronto Station, one of Earth's main orbital platforms. Through the window, James could see crowds gathering, military officials, government representatives, media personnel, and civilians who'd heard about the story and wanted to witness it in person. His sister Katie was down there somewhere. So was his father. They were about to meet Rex. When the cargo bay doors opened and James walked out with Rex beside him, the crowd went silent. For a moment, nobody moved. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the entire crowd erupted in applause. James felt tears streaming down his face. Rex's scales turned a brilliant gold color, and the creature made that low rumbling sound, the one that meant contentment. But not everything was easy. There were protests. Religious groups claimed Rex was a demon. Some military hawks argued that bringing an alien species to Earth was a security risk. Politicians debated whether Rex should have rights or be classified as property. The legal proceedings took months. There were hearings, testimonies, and arguments that seemed to circle back on themselves endlessly. Through it all, James and Rex stayed together. James was promoted to captain for his actions on Vex their Prime. He could have taken a cushy desk job, but instead he requested a position with the Xenology Department. He wanted to help make sure that Rex, and any other sentient beings humanity encountered, would be treated with dignity and respect. The breakthrough came when Foster conducted a series of tests that demonstrated Rex's cognitive abilities. The creature could solve complex puzzles. He understood abstract concepts. When shown images of different emotions on human faces, Rex could identify which emotion was being displayed. When Foster asked him simple questions using a specially designed communication interface, Rex's responses showed reasoning and self-awareness. "This being is not just intelligent," Foster announced before a packed audience of scientists and politicians. "He is conscious. He understands his own existence. He has preferences, desires, and the capacity for genuine choice. By any reasonable definition, Rex is a person." That testimony changed everything. The legal case was settled in James's favor. Rex was granted full citizenship in the United Earth Federation. He was no longer anyone's possession. He was an individual with rights, freedoms, and protections under the law. It was unprecedented and it was beautiful. 3 months later, James and Rex left the orbital stations behind. James had saved enough money from his military salary to purchase land on New Seattle, a colony world that had been established about 50 years earlier. It was far enough from the main cities to offer privacy but close enough to civilization that they could maintain connections when they wanted to. The land was vast and wild, rolling meadows that reminded James of Earth, but with the strange beauty of an alien world. The sky was a shade of violet that shifted to blue near the horizon. The vegetation was mostly that purple-tinted plant life, but there were patches of open grassland where Rex could run. James built their home with his own hands. It took months, but he wanted it to be right. He created large open spaces where Rex could move freely, with high ceilings to accommodate the creature's full height. But he also built a workshop for himself, filled with tools and equipment where he could tinker and think. There was a common area where they could be together, with comfortable spots for both of them. The first night they spent there, James sat on the porch watching the twin moons rise over the horizon. Rex rested beside him, his massive head on James's lap like he was a house pet instead of a creature that weighed over a ton. "We made it," James whispered. "We actually made it." Rex's scales shifted through soft colors, golds, silvers, and warm ambers. The creature made that contented rumbling sound, and James felt something settle deep in his chest. For the first time since the crash on Vex their Prime, he felt at peace. They weren't alone anymore. They were home. 10 years had passed since James and Rex first arrived on New Seattle. The cabin had grown over the years, expanded, improved, transformed into something that reflected both their lives. What started as a simple shelter had become a real home, filled with memories and meaning. James was 42 now, his military uniform long retired. His hair had started to gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from laughing and squinting in the alien sunlight. But he moved with a sense of purpose that hadn't changed. He'd become the director of the Interspecies Relations Institute, a position that had emerged specifically because of what happened between him and Rex. The institute sat about 5 miles from their home, a sprawling facility that studied communication and cooperation between human and alien species. It had started small, just James and Foster working to document Rex's abilities and help other humans understand that not all aliens were threats. But word spread. Other cases emerged. A human researcher on a distant colony had bonded with a creature resembling a large insectoid being. A trader had formed a partnership with an intelligent bird species. Slowly, people started realizing what James had known all along. Connection transcended biology. The institute now employed over 50 people. They had laboratories, observation areas, and most importantly, a school. That's where James spent most of his time these days, teaching. He stood in front of a classroom of 20 eager students, ranging in age from 14 to 40. They were from different colonies, different backgrounds, but they all shared one thing. They wanted to understand what made relationships between species possible. "The key," James was saying, gesturing with his hands like he always did when he got passionate about something, "is recognizing that intelligence and emotion aren't unique to humans. When I first pulled Rex from that water, I could have seen him as a threat. Could have seen him as a specimen to study. Could have seen him as property like the princess did. But I chose to see him as an individual. That choice changed everything. One of the younger students, a girl named Lily who couldn't have been more than 16, raised her hand. But how did you know? How could you tell he was intelligent? James smiled. He got this question a lot. Honestly, I didn't know at first, but I paid attention. I observed. I treated him with respect and he returned that respect. Communication doesn't always require words, Lily. Sometimes it's about being present with someone, listening to what they're trying to tell you. After class, James walked across the institute's grounds. The buildings were designed with a unique architecture that blended human and Vextherian styles, an intentional symbol of cooperation. Everywhere he looked, he could see the impact of his work. Research teams were studying translation matrices. Engineers were designing communication devices for species that operated on different frequency ranges. Teachers were preparing curriculum for schools where human and alien children might learn together someday. But the heart of it all was still back at the home James shared with Rex. When James arrived that evening, Rex was waiting on the porch like he always did. The creature was older now too. His scales didn't shift colors quite as quickly as they used to, and his movements were a bit slower. But his 6 eyes were still sharp, still full of intelligence and warmth. "Hey buddy," James said, running his hand across Rex's scales. "Good day?" Rex rumbled in response, a sound that had become as familiar to James as his own heartbeat. The creature stood and walked with him into the house. They had their routine, dinner first, then sitting together on the wide porch as the sun set. It was during one of these quiet evenings that James received notification that a delegation from Vexthar Prime was arriving on New Seattle. His heart had practically stopped when he saw the message. Princess Kaelsira was sending representatives. Representatives, not the princess herself. Apparently she'd been dealing with significant political fallout from what had happened with Rex. Progressive voices on her world were questioning the Vextharian hierarchy and their treatment of sentient beings. The delegation consisted of 6 young Vextharians, all dressed in robes that seemed less rigid than the princess's had been. When James met them at the institute, he could see curiosity in their expressions, not the cold indifference he'd seen on Vexthar Prime. "We've heard the story," one of them said, her scales rippling with what James had learned to recognize as respect. "We want to understand. We want to meet Rex." James had asked Rex that morning if he'd be willing to see them. The creature's scales had shifted to a soft purple color, contemplation, and then to gold. Agreement. So they went to the home. When Rex emerged from the house, the young Vextharians gasped. They'd seen images, of course, but seeing him in person was different. They saw not just an animal but a being with dignity and presence. "He was ours," one of them said quietly. "The princess owned him." "No," James corrected gently. "He was never anyone's to own. He always belonged to himself. I just helped him understand that." They spent hours talking with Rex. James facilitated the conversation, using the communication devices they developed at the institute. Through the translators, Rex shared his story. But more importantly, he shared what it felt like to go from being treated as property to being treated as a person. "The human saw me," Rex's harmonic purring was rendered into words by the device. "Not as what I was supposed to be. Not as what I was told I was. He saw what I actually was, a being with thoughts, with feelings, with the right to choose my own path. That is the greatest gift one being can give another." By the time the delegation left, several of them were crying. They promised to bring Rex's message back to their people. They promised that change was coming to Vexthar Prime. As the years continued to pass, James watched the ripples of what had started in that lagoon spread across the galaxy. Other humans and aliens began forming bonds. Governments began establishing protocols for treating sentient beings with respect. Educational programs started teaching empathy across species lines. Princess Kaelsira eventually lost her throne, not through violence but through cultural shift. Young Vextharians inspired by Rex's story pushed for reforms. They wanted a society that recognized worth in all conscious beings, not just those born into power. It took years, but it happened. James and Rex grew old together. When James finally passed away at 78, peaceful and content in their home on New Seattle, Rex stayed beside him through his final moments. The creature's scales flickered through every color they'd ever displayed, a rainbow of memory and love. The legacy they left wasn't just about one human and one alien learning to care for each other. It was about opening a door that could never be closed. A door that allowed people across the galaxy to see each other as more than threats or property or strangers. It was about recognizing that compassion was the most powerful force in the universe. And sometimes, it started with one person pulling a drowning creature from the water and choosing to see them as a friend. That choice, that simple, profound choice, had changed everything. The end.